Salam, peace be upon you. We begin with what we have already certified. Only differences in phi are public, never absolute phi, and only inside a licensed finite window with a passport. We require coherence, identifiability, an honest ceiling nmax, and priced uncertainty. Because phi is cyclic, we unwrap locally with a lift and keep only lift invariant results. If global unwrapping fails, we use cuts and keep only cut invariants. Aliased zones are excised as counterfeit. Only certified domain D is legal. Now we move into part 19, and our mission is simple to say and hard to obey. We must stop ourselves from worshipping our own projections. Because we have already extracted the first public object. We said it in part 18, and we say it again now, as sound, not as symbols. A equals d phi tilde. A equals d phi tilde means this. We have a locally unwrapped version of phi called phi tilde, and we take its change, not a story of what happens, not a cause, not a force, just the minimal carrier of variation that the compiler forces us to admit once we have a legal domain. A is not a particle. A is not a substance. A is not a piece of furniture in the universe. A is the first certified public object that survives lift shifts, survives cut relocation, survives alias excision, survives cross-window replication, and survives the audit. And now the danger begins, because the moment we have A, our old habits rush back in wearing friendly names. We look at A and we say, here is time. We point at one way of reading A and we call it omega. Omega is the time readout. We look at A and we say, here is space. We point at another way of reading A and we call it kappa. Kappa is the space readout. Then we look at the relationship between those two readouts and we say, here is motion, here is kinematics. We call that nu. Nu is the motion readout, the kinematics readout, the way the time pattern and the space pattern relate in a chosen description. Time, space, motion. And if we are careless, we fall right back into the oldest myth. We treat time as a container. We treat space as a stage. We treat motion as a thing that floats inside them. We start arguing about which one is more real. We start naming ghosts. We start smuggling geometry. We start telling stories about how things unfold. And we break the episode 14 firewall. So part 19 is the discipline that prevents that collapse. Here is the rule we certify in this part, in the simplest possible words. Omega, kappa, and nu are readouts only. There are three ways of reading the same underlying certified object, A. They must always be able to recombine back into A. None of them is allowed to become a primitive, and any claim about time, space, or motion that cannot be rewritten as an A claim inside certified domain D with full passport and invariance tests is rejected as smuggled ontology and sent to the negative archive. That is triunity enforcement. When we feel tempted to crown time, space, or motion, we pause, return to A, and redo the audit. Now, let us make this feel ordinary, because if this part stays abstract, it will not enter the bones. Imagine you are holding a small apple in your hand. If you look at it under sunlight, it looks shiny and bright. If you look at it under a warm lamp, it looks golden. If you look at it in shadow, it looks dark and quiet. Three different looks, one apple. The brightness is not a separate apple. The gold color is not a separate apple. The darkness is not a separate apple. They are readouts produced by choice of lighting and viewpoint. A is the apple. Omega, kappa, and nu are three looks of the same A, produced by how we choose to read variation through time, through space, and through motion. And here is the key point. The readout can change while the apple stays the same. That is not a paradox. That is what readouts are. Now let us use a parade because it is easy to picture. A parade moves through a city. We stand on a hill. From the hill, the parade seems to move left to right across our view. That is a motion readout, a kinematics feel. Now a drone looks from above. The same parade is curving around streets. It looks like a different motion, still the same parade. Now a marcher inside the parade looks around. The parade does not feel like a flow at all. It feels like a moving world with a fixed center. Are there three parades? No. One parade, three descriptions. If we argue about which motion is the real motion, we are worshipping the projection. Triunity enforcement says, stop, keep the underlying object, keep the invariant. Do not build ontology out of the readout. Now we bring it back to our compiler. In episode 14, time, space, and motion are not primitives. They are names for axes of readout. Time is a readout label for how A presents when we compare along the time coordinate inside our window. Space is a readout label for how A presents when we compare along the space coordinate inside our window. Motion, or kinematics, is a readout label for how those two readouts relate in a chosen description. Because those readouts depend on the description, none of them gets to rule the others. Now we translate the formal heart into audio language. We start from phi. Phi is cyclic comparability. Phi maps events in X to positions on a circle called S1. We do not have absolute phi. We only have differences, delta phi, inside licensed windows. Because phi is on a circle, we unwrap locally. We construct a lift. We produce phi tilde, an unwrapped version of phi on a local patch. Different lifts can differ by adding a constant or by adding a whole number of turns. And those differences are bookkeeping, not reality. Then we differentiate phi tilde on certified domain D. That gives A. A is the derivative of phi tilde. A equals D phi tilde. Now we choose a description of the window that includes a time direction and space directions. In that description, A can be read in a time way and in a space way. The time readout of A is omega. It tells us how quickly the phase comparison changes when we step along time inside the window. The space readout of A is kappa. It tells us how the phase comparison changes when we step across space inside the window. And when kappa is not zero, we can form the motion or kinematics readout nu, which is, in simple terms, omega divided by kappa in the relevant direction. Nu is the readout that people hear as the speed of a pattern. But now we say the most important sentence of the part. Omega, kappa, and nu are not three separate certified objects. They are components and relations of A under a chosen description. If we change the description, the components can mix, while A, as the underlying certified carrier, remains the same. This is why projection worship is a scientific disease. It takes a description-dependent component and pretends it is a description-independent reality. So we give ourselves a simple spoken formula that keeps us honest. We say, A is the whole arrow of change. Omega is what that arrow looks like when we look only a long time. Kappa is what that arrow looks like when we look only along space. Nu is the motion readout that compares the two. If you want one audio equation, here it is. We say A equals omega times dt plus kappa x times dx plus kappa y times dy plus kappa z times dz. In plain language, A is built from one time part and three space parts. If we change how we label time and space in our description, those parts can mix, but the whole A stays the same. Now we do a stress test you can picture. Imagine we draw a grid on the floor of a room. We call the left-right direction X and the front-back direction Y. That is our space description. Now we rotate the grid by 45 degrees and call the new directions x prime and y prime. The same carpet pattern now has different x spacing and y spacing. Nothing about the carpet changed. Our space readouts changed because our space description changed. The same is true when we change how we slice a window into time and space. One lab calls a certain sampling clock the time axis. Another lab uses a shifted clock and a shifted spatial reference. Their omega and kappa readouts can look different. Triunity enforcement says they must still meet at the same A when they translate properly. And we put a rule around nu, because nu is the easiest place to hallucinate. Nu is only defined when the relevant kappa is not zero. If there is no space pattern, there is no meaningful motion readout. So we do not allow anyone to say a speed if the space readout is missing. That is an operator legality guard in everyday form. If kappa is zero, nu is undefined, and any speed claim is illegal. We also add the simplest cross-window replication rule. If two different licensed windows look at the same phenomenon with different instruments, they may report different omega and kappa readouts. That is allowed. But once both windows reconstruct A, the two A fields must agree within the declared uncertainty where their certified domains overlap. If they do not, we do not argue about time or space. We revoke the claim and we locate the inconsistency, usually near boundaries, cut colors, alias masks, or low coherence zones. This is how we keep time talk, space talk, and motion talk from becoming tribal. We do not fight about projections. We audit the carrier. Let us make this mixing feel simple. Imagine a rectangular piece of cloth with stripes. If we call the stripes horizontal, then the cloth has a certain horizontal spacing. If we rotate the cloth 90 degrees, the same stripes become vertical, and now the spacing is reported on a different axis. Did the cloth change? No, only the labels changed. Time and space labels can be like that in our descriptions. We do not treat the labels as reality. We treat the underlying pattern A as reality. Now we ground this in the simplest everyday experience of all. The wagon wheel in a movie. You have seen it. A wheel spins and a camera samples it. Sometimes the spokes look like they spin backward. Sometimes they look like they stand still. What changed? The wheel did not change. The camera readout changed. The motion readout nu can flip sign, while the underlying rotation stays the same, because sampling and description changed. That is a perfect reminder that motion readouts are not sacred. They are readouts. Now let us travel across scales with one idea. The same underlying structure can be described with time language, space language, or motion language, depending on viewpoint and instrument. In music, we can describe the same melody by time, by space, or by motion. Time. The rhythm, the beat, how often it repeats. That is omega language. Space. The spacing between notes, the shape of the melody on a scale, the pattern across pitch space. That is kappa language. Motion. How a theme travels from instrument to instrument, how a wave of sound moves across a hall. That is nu language. One song, three readouts. In ocean waves, we can describe the same wave by time, by space, or by motion. Time. How often the water rises at a fixed buoy. Omega. Space. How far apart the crests are across the sea. Kappa. Motion. How fast the crests appear to travel. New. One wave pattern, three readouts. In a hospital monitor, a heart rhythm can be described the same way. Time. How often the beat repeats. Omega. Space. How the electrical pattern spreads across the chest. Kappa. Motion. How the pattern seems to sweep. New. One heart pattern, three readouts. In brain recordings, the same pattern can be read in three ways. Time, the frequency at one electrode, omega. Space, the wavelength across the head, kappa. Motion, the kinematics of a traveling wave, nu. One brain pattern, three readouts. In a city, the same day can be described in three ways. Time, how quickly cues form and dissolve, omega. Space, how density patterns sit across neighborhoods, kappa. Motion, how congestion waves move along roads, nu. One city pattern, three readouts. In markets, the same shock can be described in three ways. Time, how quickly prices respond, omega. Space, how differences are patterned across sectors, kappa. Motion, how the shock seems to propagate, nu. One market structure, three readouts. At every scale, if we worship one readout, we become blind in two directions. Now we state the heart of triunity as a crisp rule we can audit. A is the carrier. Omega is the time readout of A. Kappa is the space readout of A. Nu is the motion or kinematics readout that relates them. And triunity enforcement means every omega, kappa, and nu claim must bow to A. Now we install the gates, but we weave them as locks that keep us honest. First lock is the recomposition gate. Whenever we report omega, kappa, or nu, we must show how they came from A, and we must show that they can go back. In audio, it sounds like this. We extract A from phi tilde on domain D. Then we choose a description. We take the time readout and call it omega. We take the space readout and call it kappa. We compute the motion readout nu if it is defined. Then we recombine omega and kappa into an A reconstruction. The reconstructed A must match the original A within the declared uncertainty budget. If that recomposition fails, we do not blame reality. We blame our projection. We correct or we refuse. Second lock is the projection privilege ban. This is where we remove an old habit from our language. We do not say time is fundamental. We do not say space is fundamental. We do not say motion is fundamental. We do not say omega drives, kappa causes, or nu explains, because those verbs turn a readout into a primitive. Episode 14 refuses causal language, but here we go deeper. Even a sentence that makes omega feel like the boss is a violation. We speak in the honest form. In this description, the time readout is such and such. In this description, the space readout is such and such. In this description, the motion readout is such and such. The certified object is A. Third lock is the invariance gate. This is the harsh test, and it is beautiful, because it turns argument into procedure. We stress the system under allowed changes. We shift the lift. A must not change. If cuts exist, we relocate the cuts. A must not change on the legal domain. We refine the window within passport rules. A must remain stable within uncertainty. We change instruments or equivalent reconstruction methods. A must agree within cross-instrument parity. And then we change the way we split our description into time and space directions. We expect omega and kappa to change because they are readouts, but we require the recomposed A to stay the same. That last point is the point of maturity. We do not demand that omega is invariant. We demand that A is invariant and omega transforms as a readout. Now we make this point with the river analogy. One person stands on the bank and says the water moves at 3 meters per second. Another person sits in a boat drifting with the current and says the water moves at nearly zero relative to the boat. If they worship their speed readout as absolute, they will fight forever. But if they agree that speed is a readout relative to a description, and they focus on the underlying relation, the fight ends. The river is one. The readouts differ. Omega, kappa, and nu behave like that. They are meaningful only with a stated description. A is the carrier that lets different descriptions meet. Now we deliver the prediction, in the episode 14 style. Not a future event, but a forbiddenness footprint. If triunity enforcement is true, then apparent contradictions between time talk, space talk, and motion talk will dissolve when rewritten in A language. People will say it is standing in time, meaning omega is near zero in their description, while others will say it is structured in space, meaning kappa is not zero, and they will think there is a contradiction. There is no contradiction when we speak correctly. A can have a space readout without a time readout in one description. And in another description, the same A can have mixed readouts. The contradiction was created by worshipping the projection. Here is another footprint. If triunity enforcement is true, then any claim that treats a change in omega alone as a change in reality will fail when we change description. The claim will collapse unless it translates back into A and survives invariance. Projection-based claims will be brittle. A-based claims will be stable. Now we state the falsifier, because without a falsifier, this is not science, it is theology. Find a licensed high coherence window with a certified domain D and with all bookkeeping verified, where two equivalent descriptions produce the same A within uncertainty, yet the time readout omega differs in a way that cannot be explained as readout change, cannot be explained as uncertainty, cannot be explained as domain violations, and cannot be recomposed back into A. That would mean omega carries extra public structure not contained in A. If that happens, triunity enforcement fails, and we must expand the compiler. We do not hide from that possibility. We invite it, because it would be a genuine escape. Now we must speak the compulsory toolchain line once, clearly, because this episode is a compiler. Licensed window, then passport with coherence and identifiability, then nmax and uncertainty, then local lift, then cuts if needed, then excisions, then certified domain D, then A equals D phi tilde, then finite jets up to nmax, then invariance collapse, then topology and defects, then invariant bases, then stability and entities, then scale stratification, then escape test, then handoff. That is the pipeline, and triunity enforcement is one of its locks. Now let us add one more across-scale image to make this unforgettable. Imagine a mountain. We can describe a mountain by time, by space, or by motion. Time, how long it takes to climb. That is a time readout. Space, the shape of the trail, the slope, the pattern of ridges. That is a space readout. Motion, the pace, the speed, how the climb feels as kinematics. That is a motion readout. If two hikers argue, one saying this mountain is slow, and the other saying this mountain is steep, they are not contradicting each other. They are reading different projections of one mountain. Now replace the mountain with A. One scientist says omega is high, meaning fast time variation in their description. Another says kappa is high, meaning tight space pattern in their description. Another says nu is high, meaning the motion readout suggests fast pattern travel. All three can be meaningful only if they recompose to the same A and survive invariance. Triunity enforcement is simply the rule that forces them to meet at the same object. Now we address the common worry. We measure time with clocks. We measure space with rulers. We measure motion with speedometers. So how can we say time, space, and motion are not primitive? Here is the honest answer. Clocks, rulers, and speedometers are interfaces. They are not oracles. They produce readouts inside a window, with limits, with uncertainty, and with conventions. A clock gives a time readout. A ruler gives a space readout. A speedometer gives a motion readout. None of these devices certifies primitive ontology. They certify measurements, and measurements must pass the compiler. Triunity enforcement forces us to remember what measurement is, a readout of an underlying certified relation, not a direct glimpse of an absolute thing. Now we close with the audit artifact and the revocation clause, because our program lives or dies by audit. Here is what we write to the ledger for part 19. We write the passport identifier and the window boundaries. We write the certified domain D, including all boundary colors, cut colors, and alias masks. We write the A reconstruction log, how we obtained A equals D phi tilde with lift validity and lift invariance tests. We write any cut manifest and the cut relocation test results. We write the alias diagnostics and the excision mask. We write the triunity recomposition report, omega, kappa, and nu, extracted as readouts in a stated description, recomposed to A, and the residual map compared to torrents. We write the projection privilege audit. Any sentence that grants time, space, or motion primitive status is flagged. If uncorrected, it is revoked. We write the invariance stress test. We show how omega and kappa change under allowed description changes, while A remains stable within uncertainty. And we show cross-window replication where possible. If any part fails, we issue a refusal certificate and we classify the failure. And now the revocation clause, spoken plainly. If any omega, kappa, or nu claim cannot be rewritten in A language on certified domain D, revoke it. If any projection is granted privilege as primitive reality, revoke it. If recomposition back to A fails beyond the declared uncertainty, revoke it. If invariance stress tests fail, revoke it. Triunity enforcement tolerates no exceptions, because exceptions become mythology. So here is the carry sentence you keep. 3 shadows, 1 derivative. Time is a readout, space is a readout, motion, or kinematics, is a readout. A is the carrier. And if you want to go deeper than this audio story, the formal work is on Zenodo. Search for holophase. And we keep this rule even when the language feels comforting and familiar. Part 19 is complete. Always, peace be upon you.